With me today is Tim Scott, the congressman from the 1st District of South Carolina. He's a leading member of his freshman class, and Tim Scott is the first African-American Republican to be elected to a state or federal office from South Carolina in over 150 years. Welcome, Tim Scott.
Mallory, it's good to be with my mentor. How are you, sir?
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Tim, what is going on in the Congress today? When are we going to get something done?
Well, my opinion is less getting done is a very positive thing for the American people. The fact of the matter is when you really look at what we have done by taking over the majority of the House is we're able to stop bad things from happening, and that is a very important part of the overall construct of Congress.
Congressman, what are the biggest challenges facing our nation right now?
Really good question. I think if I look at the question and say the biggest challenge facing our nation today is unemployment. That is the most urgent challenge we have. Perhaps the most important challenge, however, would be our debt. $15 trillion debt. Someone has to pay it back. We cannot continue to spend money we do not have, buying things we cannot afford.
Congressman Scott, what are you doing to tackle the Obama administration's big government? What specifically is Congress doing? What are you doing?
Certainly. One of my bills, bill passed, H.R. 2587, was a bill to tell the federal government to stop trying to grow its strength and its power through taking money from everyday companies like the Boeing Company and transferring jobs from Charleston to Washington State in an attempt to fund the president's reelection campaign by having big labor have a bigger role in increasing the size of government.
Isn't the tax code a big problem? You've been vocal on that.
It's a huge
What should we
problem.
do with that?
First thing we should do is understand that taxes are a disincentive for whatever it is that we're going to produce. So the number one thing that I think we can do immediately is to reduce the corporate tax rate. Today, the global economy, our rate is the second highest rate in the world. The average tax rate is around 25%. We must become competitive so that we can create jobs, not by increasing taxes, by lowering taxes. It's counterintuitive.
What would you lower it to?
I would
the
lower it
corporate
to
tax rate.
My bill is 23%, and it allows for permanent repatriation. In other words, we will not double tax the profits that come back to our country. 3 million jobs by not having double taxation on profits made overseas.
Congressman Scott, by doing that, though, you create bigger deficits, don't you?
Not at all. Taxes are counterintuitive. When you actually reduce the taxes, you see more revenue and more opportunity. So you grow the economy, not in the government sector, but in the private sector. And that's where the money, not the rubber, but the money meets the employee.
If we're able this time around to get a Republican president, do you think we'll be able to?
Please.
Do you think we'll be able to reestablish a pro-business climate? And what would that pro-business climate look like?
I'll tell you, if we get a Republican as the president, we will have already reestablished the very foundation of a pro-growth economy. And the way it would look and the way it would operate is simply this. The first thing we would do is we would start repealing the regulatory environment and the regulations that cost our businesses $2 trillion. That's the first step. Think about it. The EPA currently says that dust is a hazardous material and has to be wet down before you drive your car on a farm. How ridiculous is that? The NLRB tells—
National Labor Relations Board.
Exactly. Tells America's largest exporter, you can't create jobs in America. We have to start creating common sense in Washington, D.C.
What does that look like?
Well, it looks like first a repeal of regulations like the fugitive dust regulation. Looks like the repeal of the NLRB's ability to move jobs from one location to another location. It looks like allowing the FDA to expedite the process of creating new drugs and new opportunities to save lives and to improve the quality of life that we experience. That is one part. That's one pillar. The other pillar, of course, is tax reform. We start with the corporate tax rate, but we have to create the incentives in the personal tax code. I'd love to see a fair tax or a flat tax. Anything is better than the current IRS system, even the 999, by the way, but not quite as good as the flat tax or the fair tax.
You've mentioned frequently the problem that we have with deficits.
Yes.
There is a super committee right now that is putting together a program to cut our deficit over the next 10 years. And if they don't cut it, automatic cuts will go into effect.
Yes.
First of all, do you think they're going to be able to reach an agreement to cut it?
You know, after several weeks, they have done nothing. They have no solutions on the table, according to the members of the committee. They're working very hard to get something done, and they say that it can happen. What they're talking about, however, is a big deal. Perhaps $4 trillion in cuts with a new $1 trillion of new taxes.
Would you vote for that?
Absolutely
New taxes?
not. Can't vote for new taxes.
You've never voted for new taxes, have you?
Have not. Can't.
Okay.
Because, once again, if we understand that the tax is the disincentive, that the counterintuitive position to take is by reducing taxes, we actually create more opportunities and more revenue and have a more robust economy, then you would say whatever it takes to actually create that incentive, we're better off.
Well, if the committee's report is not accepted, there are automatic cuts that take place.
Sequestration occurs, and basically what you'll see happen is that we'll have a $1.2 trillion worth of cuts over the next 10 years, and they will bifurcate the cuts. One half of the cuts will be in the security area. Department of Defense, Homeland Security will absorb $600 billion worth of cuts. And then the other $600 billion will be on the domestic side. Except for there is a 2% limitation on Medicare. They don't touch Social Security. You limit your cuts by 2% on Medicare, and that's to providers only and not to beneficiaries or recipients. So they really create a quagmire pit of where they're going to find that $600 billion on the domestic side.
But do you think they will find it?
I
They have to, don't they?
You know, Mallory, I was talking to a genius the other day, and what he told me was that there's a concept called supplementals. And everyday Americans need to understand what supplementals are. Supplementals are the workaround sequestration. In other words, you could have members of Congress saying we're going to make cuts if we don't cut spending, but then they find a workaround to increase spending while making cuts.
So in other words, they make the cut, and then they come right back around, and they put a bill in to
increase the spending to make up for those cuts.
Could that actually happen?
I hope not. We have to take a strong stance against supplementals. If we are going to be honest with the American people, and we better be, or we should not have our jobs, the bottom line is simply this. If you can't get your job done and sequestration happens, it is terrible, but it is far better to have sequestration with integrity than to lie to the American people.
Let me go over this with you again. In other words, you can make a cut and then come right back around, or a cut becomes automatic, and you go right back around and you put a bill in to get rid of that cut and get the money back.
Exactly. It's kind of like having a loan. So you borrow money from Peter to pay Paul, and you say you've had an increase.
Do you think the American people understand that can happen?
I don't think that the information's out there yet, but I guarantee you, because of this program, this opportunity, more people will understand that what we have to do is keep our feet, the members of Congress, to the fire, because we have to have integrity. One of the things that we've lost is people's trust, and it's because you make a cut and then you have a supplemental to make up for the cut. Voodoo economics. It's wrong.
You've been in Congress now almost a year. What's the most surprising thing you've learned being there?
Unfortunately, it's the truth of how close we are to the brink of bankruptcy. $15 trillion, $15 trillion debt with $1.5 trillion deficit. We are inching to the very ledge itself. And no one's pushing us. There's folks who want to jump. I'm not sure what we don't understand about bankruptcy. We have Greece, Italy, and France is going to be hung in the middle of it all because they're securing so much of that debt. What does that do to us and the folks who buy our debt? We're in the same position. We have to become very aware of the great challenges that our debt has on the long-term viability of this nation and the health of the American dream.